All right, so the first thing I did is I've just cut out with scissors the different pieces of the pattern and then put them on the different pieces of fabric. So as it's labeled, the darker color is just the centerpiece. Make sure this is the only one that you do cut up this way. And I've just outlined that with chalk. And now I'm moving on to the two white pieces. You may want to iron this a little bit because it may have wrinkled in the packaging. So anyway, I'm just outlining like this. Doesn't have to be perfect. And just remember when you're cutting these pieces out that you're not cutting around the yellow, you're cutting inside the yellow because that's where the pattern is. You just want to cut the pattern exact. Okay, so I'm going to trace out all my pattern pieces and then see you in a second. All right, so I have my pieces here that I've outlined and now I'm just going to cut it. But I will say that as you can see, I worked with the right side of the fabric, meaning the brighter side, and with the pencil markings facing up, and that's just going to help me not get confused, make sure that I have the right side up, that nothing's backwards. Wouldn't be the end of the world, but so again, I'm just cutting inside of the yellow and trying to get it pretty close, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Alright, so again, just one thing to notice is that this cutout is a cutout, and then these pieces you'll just keep whole, and then we will add black paint later to create the windows. So just keep that in mind. Alright, so I have my pieces here and there's a bit of chalk on them, so I'm going to use this opportunity to rinse them under the sink to get all the chalk out, and then I'm going to run the hot iron over them, and that's going to help them dry and it's going to get them nice and crisp. And while I'm at it, I might just take this black piece and run it under the iron as well as this, might as well. So I'm just going to rinse these, rinse the iron, and be back. All right, so now that everything is dried and flat, I'm going to take my background piece and place my hoop on top. And I'm just going to get a good idea for where everything's going. And I'm actually just going to do a quick outline. And I know this is way outside my hoop, but I just kind of want to take this away and be able to know what everything's going to look like. So as far as this piece goes, I want the triangles facing up. I'm not really sure yet how high I want it, and I'll probably just cut across before I'm ready to, well, I'll just do it now. So it doesn't have to be perfectly straight, but I'm just cutting it a little better and cleaner because it was starting to fray, etc. Alright, so I know that this will go along the bottom, and then I have this piece here, like this. So obviously this needs to go down a little further. And I just want to make sure everything's going to fit well inside that boundary because obviously the hoop was well inside, right? So when I sew this on, the yellow piece is going to actually overlap a little bit on top of the white pieces, so just keep that in mind. And you can squish them together more if you need more space or not. So that's looking pretty good. I just want to make sure that I'm going to have enough of the ground. So I put it there. It's looking pretty good. All right. And then with my moon, just want to make sure there's room for them and kind of decide, and I might just you can kind of see what you like and just play around with it a little bit, but I think something like that looks good to me. All right, so once I have everything laid out, you might just want to take a picture of this because now you're going to take it apart a bit, and then, I don't know, you just want to make sure you have everything back where it is. But what I'm going to do now is make sure that I'm keeping my blue piece as high as it was, but I'm going to take a glue stick. You don't need to do this, but it's going to make your life a little easier. And I want to make sure that I remember where this was. I could just put a little chalk mark at the edge, but I'm not going to glue right up at the top here because that's going to affect my stitching. It's going to get my needle all gunky with glue. So I'm just gluing a bit down here and staying away from the top edge. And this will just help keep your fabric in place so that, and I'm just going to cover the chalk so my life's easier. Just making sure that your fabric goes at least as far as the black. All right. So now what I'm going to do is take my blue thread and just stitch. So going to take some embroidery thread, and the thing to know about embroidery thread is that there are 6 layers, or I mean, sorry, 6 strands to each string. And in this project, we're going to work generally with 2 strands. If you want to work even thinner, you can do 1. So the trick with this is, and it's a little gross, but you really want to keep the 3 pieces far apart. So I tend to put one side in my mouth because then I can just really have 2 hands free to keep everything separate. Alright, so as you can see, you still have to use some patience, and it's a little kinky, so that's alright. So now I'm going to take a needle, and just tie a double knot at one end of your thread. Bisbee. All right, and I'm going to cut pretty close to this. Thread the needle. You don't want to work with too long of a string at one time, but you can definitely pull the string way past just so that you can have more string on there at the same time. And I'm coming up on the blue so that I've got both fabrics in there. Just stay patient, you know, your needle will come out, you might get a knot in your thread. Just try to keep calm. Listen to something fun, watch something fun. All right, so now what I'm doing is I came up through both fabrics and now I'm just stitching right on the edge of the black. So I'm going down on just the black. And it's fairly important to come up on both and then go down on the black, because if you do the opposite, then it's going to fray your fabric more. And the stitching I'm doing right now, I'm just doing big wide stitches because you won't see this. It's just to make sure that the fabric is tacked on to each other. So it's kind of your practice, and I'm just going straight up, and it's really your choice of how deep you stitch down into the fabric. You can kind of play around with it again. Right now when there's stitches you won't be seeing, which is kind of nice. And I know I won't be seeing them because they're outside of my chalked area so far. So now that I'm getting close, I'm just going to do my last stitch right inside the chalked area. And then flip my fabric over. I'm going to create a loop by tucking under a thread and then pulling my needle through the thread, and that will create a knot. And then if you're not super confident in that knot, you can just do the same again, or you could just leave the single knot. All right. So now again, I'm just going to tie off, and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. And also it's going to make your life a lot easier if you just make a habit of cutting these ends pretty short, because sometimes if you leave them long, it'll come back to haunt you later. All right. So again, I'm just starting out here, and I mean, you could start here, you could start here, doesn't really matter. I might glue this a bit because it's being a little difficult. All right. You don't have to start right on the edge either. You don't have to start way out here. All right, so I'm just going to do these few stitches. All right, so now that I have the two edges tacked on, I'm going to take my hoop. You can choose to just keep going along as you have been if you don't feel like putting your hoop on right now, but it's just going to make your life a lot easier. So try to, as best as you can, line your hoop up to where you made your chalk outline. This isn't going to be the last time you put the hoop on, but it will crease your fabric somewhat, so if you want to save yourself some effort of ironing again, just try to be around where you might want to do it at the end. Okay, so when I push straight down, my fabric is already pretty taut, but I'm just pulling this top edge while I'm tightening. You may have to hold this little nut if it's moving. I think mine's okay. So it's getting pretty tight. All right, so now you're going to do the exact same thing, but it's just going to be easier because your fabric is being held tight, so it's gonna go a lot faster. If you don't like how your initial stitches went, go ahead and go down to 1 thread if it was too chunky for you, and of course you could go up to 3 if it wasn't chunky enough. Oops. But my guess is, if anything, you'll want it a little thinner. I kind of like that you can tell that this was hand embroidered, but if you want to be a little more discreet about your stitches, you can go ahead and go down to 1 strand. All right. So again, I want to be careful about starting on the blue and then going to the black. And I'm still doing pretty big stitches because time, effort, but also I won't be seeing most of this, remember, because it's going to be covered by your other pieces. And it'll be fairly well tacked on because the glue and because of the hoop. So really you just want to make sure that it's tacked on there a bit, but my stitches are about 1/2 inch apart at least. So this should be fairly quick, and you can see how much easier it is for me to go ahead and stitch across now that I'm in the hoop. So, you know, now that I think about it, hopefully I won't have to take this out of the hoop like I thought, because the other pieces won't reach the edge. So, fingers crossed. Doing one last stitch here. And then I'm just going to tie off. It doesn't have to be the closest one to the end. That seemed like it might be a little bit of a tougher stitch to try to get through, so I just went one in, and that'll be fine. All right. Perfect. So now that I know that I'm not taking my fabric out of my hoop again, I'm just going to pull it a little more taut. So I just loosened the screw a little bit and I'm pulling it a little more taut, especially towards the top where the screw is. It tends to be a little looser. Doesn't have to be extremely tight. You just want it tight enough to where you can easily work. And you want the 2 hoops to match up, so mine tends to pop up right now. All right. Hopefully you don't, but you may need a pair of pliers to just hold this tight for you while you screw in Mine's being a little stubborn, but I think it's fine. So now I have so much extra fabric here that it might get in my way. I don't want to cut too close in because I'm going to need a little excess fabric at the end, but I'm just kind of cutting in a circle around down here because I don't want to accidentally stitch in some of this excess fabric later. So I'm gonna need just a couple inches really later, but I'm leaving more than that. All right, I might as well just do this corner. All right, so it's looking cute already. I'm going to take my pieces again, make sure that the fancier side is facing up, and lay them out how I want them. If your pieces are starting to fray a little bit, you can just cut that off. But it's not a huge deal. So if you want to line these up so that something goes a little over the edge, that's fine. You'll just have to take the fabric off the hoop and then do as we did earlier, where you're just stitching without the hoop. All right, so I just want all my bottoms to kind of line up. And it doesn't really matter how far down it is or how far up. I just want some nice area down there, and I don't want to be touching very close to in here. So I'm just trying to make everything even. You can of course adjust where your fabric is lined up too. All right, so that looks pretty good to me. That might be a little close, but that's fine. Okay, so just going to try to keep things as close to as they are. And again, I want to put some glue down, but not so close to the edge that I'm going to stitch over the glue if I can help it, because that's just gonna get it all gunky. So I'm just kind of folding it up so that I can kind of keep everything in place as much as possible so that I don't forget where it was. Try, if you can avoid it, not to get glue on anything you'll be seeing, because that's annoying. But of course, I already put this on upside down, so it's not that big of a deal. Just want to make sure I put it back right. This white fabric's tough because there's definitely a front and a back, but it's kind of hard to tell at first glance which is which. All right. So I'm going to do the white pieces first before I attach the yellow piece, because these pieces are going to be underneath that guy. So again, I'm going to do the same thing as before, where I separate out the different strands. So 2 strands. Oops, that was 3. Dokie. So you're going to do the exact same stitch on the white pieces as you did on the blue. Just be mindful around corners because you might want a few more stitches. You also might not want to put the stitches as deep in to the white, meaning this would be really deep, this is more shallow, because just aesthetics. But yeah, other than that, just very similar, always starting with your needle on the white and then moving to the black and trying to stay as close as possible to the black line. So I'm just going to start on a nice straightaway, and especially this one because I'm not going to see it probably. And I'm just holding this down with my thumb. You don't want to be so close to the edge when you come up that you are going to fray your fabric. So I don't know, it's a balance and you'll find it. You just want to be far enough in there that you're really grabbing hold of the fabric, but also not too far in that you can't really get around at the top. You want to keep everything somewhat even, but it's really not that important, especially on this side where, again, part of it will be hidden anyway. So I'm just moving all the way around. Around corners and stuff, there's not anything special you need to do. Just try not to put a stitch right into the corner because it will just take away the sharpness of it. And as you can tell, I'm holding the fabric down flat with my thumb so that I can get the fabric in, stitched in kind of flat and evenly. See, like around this corner, I might even go back in this same hole and then go up this way. But what I was saying is I just don't want a thread going straight to the corner necessarily because it's just going to fray it. But in something like this where it's more of an elbow, you probably do want to go right in there. And then again, I'm going to do the exact same on this side, going in through the same hole. So yeah, there's no perfect way to do it. I'm just going to stitch all the way around. So the moon, you're going to want to do last, and it's the same stuff. So you can just get kind of good at this because the moon's going to be kind of the toughest in that it's the smallest, but it'll be fine. Again, I recommend gluing it, but just not close to the edge. And you may or may not want to switch to one thread just because it is a smaller piece, but 2 threads is perfectly fine. I'll probably stick with 2. So yeah, that's all you need to know until you're all done sewing your pieces on. So when I see you next, I'll have all my pieces sewn on and I'll be ready to paint. All right, so now I've sewed all my pieces on, and if you like how this looks, you can of course just stop right now. But what I'm going to do next is take the paint and the paintbrush, and I'm still using these cutouts because they have the placement of the little windows, and I'm just going to use them as reference because they don't need to be exact. I mean, you could cut them out and then draw with chalk, but I'm fine just kind of referencing them. And then yeah, so just start small, and then I'm just kind of painting, you know, it just needs to be about at the location. And I have a little stray hair here, so I'm just going to cut it off because it's not pulling out. So this one's a little square. Try to get the edges pretty straight, but it's okay if they're not perfect because you're going to stitch around this if you want. Okay, so I got that one. Let's see. This one up here is towards the top of, I'm just referencing where I'll stitch across there later. So start small because you can always expand outward, but you can't really take back what you've already painted. But if you make a mistake, just work with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. All right. And then the next one. If you'd rather be more exact to what the mission looks like, you can of course just Google a picture and then kind of make up your own design on here. But I've just kind of taken a loose interpretation. So at the bottom here, I am just going to paint over some stitches, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. And I'm just stopping right at the edge of the white. Just gonna turn this upside down so that I don't smear. All right. So I think that looks pretty good. As far as this goes down here, you can paint all of it. You could paint none of it. I think I'm just gonna go with how it looks now. You can kind of simulate what it would look like if it were black. You could also cut out a background piece and kind of put it there, but I think I'm okay like this. It's just kind of like the ground is back there. So I'll clean my paintbrush. But all right, so while this is drying, I don't want to stitch on this fabric, but I might just start on the stars. So this is the one time on this project when I'm just going to use a single strand so that my stars can be thin. You can use more than one strand, but I just want mine to be nice and thin. I probably won't do too many stars on this piece just because there's so much going on and it's a pretty small hoop for how much fabric we just put on, but you can add as many stars as you want, as big as you want, whatever you feel like. Alright, so you can just kind of start anywhere, but I'm going to start down here so that I can kind of work my way up and around. And I'm just pulling my needle through, and I'm just going to create an X that's taller than it is wide, meaning that it's not exactly even, it's just kind of like long, because I want 6 points on my star. So I'm just gonna go back through that same hole. All right, so again, patience is key. So I'm making a tall X. And then going through that X, and it's perfectly fine if some sides are longer than others because it shouldn't be perfect. You could also make stars with more points than 6. You can make tiny little stars, you can make them all different sizes. Mine will be fairly uniform in size, but I'm not gonna worry too much if one is a little different than the others. Again, you can always add more stars, so if you're not sure how many you want, just start out with kind of spreading them out. And also just make sure that you're spreading out where they go, because you don't want them all to be right in a row or anything. If you run low on thread like I might in the middle of a star, just tie off. And if you're getting really low on thread and you just are not sure if you should tie off yet, it's going to be a lot less frustrating, and you're going to not lose your needle like that as much if you just tie off and then start with a new strand, even if that means wasting a little thread, because as you can see, it's a lot tougher once you get close to the end of a thread. So just save yourself the hassle like I did not. All right, so when you're tying off, just make sure if you have wet paint like I do, that you're holding up your piece and then you're just creating that loop and pulling through it like we have been. And then you can just start with a new thread anywhere. Remember that we're just using a single thread length, and just create a bunch of stars. At that point, you can be done, or I'm going to do a back stitch around all the windows, and then wherever there's a line on these pieces, I'm just going to back stitch across. So I'll show you how to do a back stitch so that you know how to do that. It's up to you whether you use 2 or 1 strands for this part. Just depends what kind of look you're going for. I'm just gonna do 1, partially because I have a piece here that's just 1 ready to go. So definitely wait until your paint is dry before you try to outline your windows. probably waiting if you have the time, or just blow drying it, before you do anything is probably a good idea. Jeez. All right. I have 3 knots and none of them are on top of each other. So what I just did is fold over my fabric and then tied a knot, because that's just going to make your knot thicker and help you, especially when you only have 1 strand like this. It's kind of tough to tie a knot that's thick enough to not just be pulled through. So again, I'm just folding, and then I've got 2 strands so that when I tie my knot, it's more substantial. And then here too, that'll just kind of stop whatever when you pull. Okay, so let's see, I'm going to do the line through these 2 because it's not touching any black, and I'm going to start at the edge of the work. You could also just start 1 stitch in, which I'm going to do since it pulled through anyway. So I'm starting 1 stitch in, and then I'm going backwards towards the edge of the fabric. And it's hard to see because it's such a thin thread, but what back stitching means is that you go forward like this. So my last stitch ended here. I'm pulling through, and then I'm going back through the same hole I went through over here. So I'm stitching backwards. And this is just a really good stitch if you are doing any kind of outlining or just straight lines that you want the thread going all the way across. All right, going back through the hole. Basically, this is just adding some detail to the piece. Not really necessary, but makes it a little more lifelike. And I'm not going all the way to the edge. I could actually go just outside the edge and have it go all the way across. I'd rather do that. Here, I'll do that here. So I'm just barely on the black. I'd rather do that than be too close inside the white and risk fraying my piece. All right, so I just made that line. And then what you'll want to do is outline all the black if you feel like it. It'll just give some nice detail to your piece. And then again, anywhere that there's a line up here. And then the other thing that you'll want to do is come up here, and you're just going to stitch a little cross above. So using back stitching, the first stitch often is forward, but then you skip ahead, and this will probably only be like 2, maybe 3 stitches tall. And if it's not thick enough or something, you can just kind of stitch over it a couple times until it looks how you want it to look. Yeah, I might just do that one more time because the cross is pretty tiny with just this 1 strand. It is a church after all. All right, so now I have my little cross there. And then just take advantage sometimes of the fact that you're working with the same color thread and the same width. So I'm just gonna come over here and make a star. You don't have to just commit to one thing you're working on if you can keep track of what you're doing and what you have to do. So yeah, basically that's it. All I'm going to do is add more stars outline the windows and complete the straight lines that are on the patterns. So that's it. The only thing I'm going to teach you to do is how to finish the work once you're done. All right, so what I'm going to do is just do really big stitches all the way around and then pull the two ends together and tie them to pull them in. Here's the finished product, and I think it turned out well. I didn't end up framing the windows with thread, but yeah, so up here there's a little chalk, so I'm just going to put that under the sink water. And then back here, as you can see, I just did big stitches and then pulled them tight. You might need to use someone else's finger in there while you double knot, just so you can get it nice and tight. So I hope you had fun.